Hi, I'm Jane, and I have the privilege of working with college students. I love how they encourage me to live outside of my comfort zone. For instance, someone had the idea that it would be great for a bunch of us who have a relationship with Jesus to wear this shirt that has a word to summarize our life before knowing Jesus and after, and then post our story online. The whole idea is classic to illustrate one of the greatest ways the Lord has changed my life. Considering my words are fearful and then free. I almost put unspoken and spoken, and you'll see why in a minute. But thanks for the opportunity to share my story. My story has an interesting beginning. My mom had tuberculosis before I was born. She almost died several times and was definitely not supposed to have any more children. She only had one lung and had had 7 ribs removed during the treatment. But when my brother, who was 1 year old when she got sick, turned 14, 5 days later, I showed up. From the time I could understand, my mother told me that if it wasn't for the Lord, she wouldn't be alive and I wouldn't either. So it was really easy for me to believe in God. My parents' faith really grew during the time of my mom's illness. So talking about the Lord and how the Bible related to everyday life was a normal conversation in my home growing up. I totally believed in Jesus when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And when I was 9, I was sitting in church one day, and at the end of the sermon, the pastor began to explain why Jesus needed to die on the cross and pay for our sin against God. I'd grown up a few houses down from a friend, Phyllis, and I remember praying that morning that Phyllis would ask Jesus into her heart, thinking that she was a little mean. We'd get in a disagreement and she'd pull my ponytail, and of course I'd pull hers back. But anyway, I looked to the front of the church, and to my surprise, Phyllis was talking to the pastor. The Lord then quietly, in the stillness of my heart, raised the question, "What about you?" I thought, well, I already believed this. But then I remember thinking, yes, you believe that I died on the cross for the sins of the world, but have you ever asked me to come into your heart and forgive your sin, give you eternal life? And I realized that I had never made that decision. So that afternoon, I went home and talked through the decision with my parents. And I remember with a real simple knowledge of who Jesus claimed to be and a real simple faith that he was who he claimed he was, with a very simple prayer, I admitted that I was sinful and separated from him because of it. And I asked him to come into my life, to forgive me, and to give me the life he created me to live. That was 50 years ago. And still to date, the wisest and best decision I've ever made. From there, I was in no way perfect, but I actually did think a lot about God in junior high and high school. I wanted to live for him, and I wanted my friends to know that I was a Christian and hoped that my life would give them a desire to know Jesus too. About every 6 months, I would actually rededicate my life, wanting to pray more, read my Bible more, share my faith more, think about God more, be more like Jesus more. Finally, toward the end of high school, I was confronted with the choice to yield everything in my life to the Lord's control. I thought I'd already done this, and remember praying for my friend Chip to surrender his life to the Lord. Sound familiar? Then you guessed it. That still small voice in my heart asked, "What about you?" Turned out I hadn't yielded my future to the Lord. Since it was in the future, I didn't understand how it affected my life in the present. But it was. That night, I remember reasoning that if God loved me perfectly and I didn't love myself or anyone else perfectly, and he knew the future, and I didn't know what was going to happen 10 minutes from now, that it only made sense that his knowledge and his love could make me much happier than I could make myself. So if you notice, from a completely self-centered motivation, I yielded my life to the Lord. By giving him my greatest fears and deciding to trust him with whatever he had for my future, that was the next best decision that I've ever made. I was no longer redoubling my efforts to live for God, but now I was trusting his Spirit who lived in me to empower my daily life. And that's when life really began to change for me. Let me just finish with one example. Growing up, for some reason, I was afraid of most people outside of my family and just friends in the neighborhood. I cried every day in first grade. I became more subtle about it as I got older, but I still played it very safe in relationships. I never took the initiative with people I didn't know. I'll hear people today say, "Oh, they've been my friend since third grade." And I don't think I had any friends in elementary school because I was too afraid to talk to them. I remember being shocked at my first experience at Girl Scout camp to realize that I actually liked meeting new people. I'm sure they introduced themselves first, though. I thought of myself as shy, which I thought was a virtue. Until in graduate school, the Lord began to convict me that in my case, I was self-protective and unwilling to risk rejection, and that was why I never took the initiative. When I'd see a new person, my first thought was fear that they wouldn't want to talk to me, and even if I took the initiative, that it wouldn't matter. But then the Lord began to help me realize that I could love others all I wanted, regardless of their response. This was a revolutionary thought to me. He said to love others as He loved me, not as they loved me. An old song by Janis Joplin called Me and Bobby McGee has a line that says, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." Why was I so afraid? Since the Lord loved me, I really had nothing to lose. I might make a new friend, but worst case, I'd still have the joy of believing God and loving because He loved me. When I realized this, though, I still didn't know what to do about it because for 22 years I'd had no practice. At this point, that familiar nudge in my heart brought to mind, "Just say, 'Hi, I'm Jane. What's your name?'" And that's what I did. And that's what I still try to do, even though it's still a choice for me every time. And I can't tell you how much His joy has changed my life because of it. In John 15:9-12, Jesus was talking with His disciples, and He said, "Just as the Father has loved me, I love you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love." I'm telling you these things so that my joy might be in you and your joy might be made full. And this is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. That's my story. Thanks.